5 years ago Sunday, former Houstonian George Floyd was murdered by Minneapolis police, sparking widespread protests. I'm Craig Cohen, today on Houston Matters, examining the legacy of that moment 5 years later.
Houston Matters with Craig Cohen is a production of Houston Public Media with support from Baylor College of Medicine.
Also this hour, how budget shortfalls and cuts to NASA and the ISS may impact Houstonians. Then, from a George Floyd Third Ward mural's demolition to Whataburger sued over onions to Sesame Street's future gaining some clarity, this week's non-expert panel weighs in on intrigues in the news on the good, the bad, and the ugly. And members of the Kinetic string ensemble discuss a decade of performances ahead of a concert tonight. We'll start with the news update from NPR and News 88.7. Stay with us. This is Houston Matters. I'm Craig Cohen. Good morning. Coming up this hour, how NASA and ISS budget shortfalls might impact Houstonians. This week's The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and 10 years of the Kinetic string ensemble. But first, sounds from Houston's March for George Floyd in June of 2020. Sunday marks the 5th anniversary of Floyd's murder by Minneapolis police, which sparked nationwide protests and rallies. Floyd grew up here in Houston in Third Ward. Dr. Melanie Price is a professor of political science and the director of the Ruth J. Simmons Center for Race and Justice at Prairie View A&M University. Dr. Price, good morning.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. As I said, George Floyd grew up here in Houston. Was the reaction here 5 years ago this Sunday different at all from the rest of the country?
I don't think it was, except for one fact, and that is people are familiar with the area where George Floyd is from. And people in Houston love Houstonians, as you know that, no matter where they are in the world. And so I think there was a way in which people took this kind of personally, in that someone who was from their own ranks had experienced such a heart-wrenching end to their lives. And so when they took to the streets with more of a personal stake in ensuring that justice was served, but also because his family was here, they also wanted to collectively wrap their arms around that family.
Not just here in Houston, but elsewhere, Black Lives Matter, the phrase and the movement had been around before Floyd's murder. But when the video of what happened to him spread, it really did give rise to that movement. Now, 5 years in, how would you characterize the state of that movement today?
I think the movement is more fractured, but we also have to remember that Black Lives Matter is 20 years old. And so it is more of an established movement than many people think about it. Think about the death of Trayvon Martin, the death of Michael Brown. Trayvon Martin would have been 30 years old this year.
Remind us, where were we as Americans on this issue when this happened 5 years ago?
When this happened 5 years ago, we were all sort of huddled in our homes, having work and school and play all in our living rooms, and we were all trying to understand how to manage COVID, which seems so far away right now. We were all trying to figure out whether or not our groceries were contaminated with COVID, who could come into our homes. And so we were in a very vulnerable health state, but it turns out that this period also was marked by a vulnerable political state. And that is, it's not just George Floyd, it's that George Floyd came on the heels of Ahmaud Arbery and of Breonna Taylor. And it seemed like these were Black people who were doing the most mundane things you could imagine. They were out for a jog. Breonna Taylor was sleeping in her own bed in her own house in the middle of the night. George Floyd was at a convenience store in the neighborhood where he lived, right? They were doing things that nobody should die for. And yet there was video, there was testimonials about the ways in which their lives were unnecessarily cut short.
What do you think has changed and what hasn't about Americans' attitudes in the 5 years since?
I think there's been such rapid change, right? So the videos and those kinds of things have made it difficult for people to say that this these things didn't happen, right? So we can't deny the impact of the videos and the public nature of these deaths. What is also true is that how those videos are being interpreted, it varies greatly along racial lines. And who you are more sympathetic to in that video varies greatly along racial lines.
5 years ago Sunday, there was it was the beginning of a period of a lot of protests. There was, of course, a lot of anger. There were also a lot of promises made following Floyd's murder. What promises were kept and which ones seem to have been dropped?
I think initially there were lots of promises that were being kept. You know, people were doing more racial reconciliation, I guess is what you might call it. So churches and community organizations were reaching out across racial lines. People were donating to Black justice organizations, including Black Lives Matter. People were starting funds at their jobs. They were holding lectures. They started observing Juneteenth. They started doing all of these things that looked like there was going to be a window where there would be more discussion about the different impact that your racial identification can have on your lives. But almost as rapidly as that started, a retrenchment began as well. I think the thing that we often forget about even the movements like the civil rights movement that we treasure is that it wasn't just the people who were trying to open the doors to more inclusiveness that were engaged in that moment. There was also a resistance against that. And in this moment, it feels like as those doors were opening, the resistance hit all of that with full force. The refusal to accept and the fight against DEI and the discussions about critical race theory and the banning of books came almost on the heels of those kinds of initiatives.
We will talk more about Floyd and a mural on a building in Third Ward that was just demolished this week later in the hour. Dr. Melanie Price is a professor of political science and director of the Ruth J. Simmons Center for Race and Justice at Prairie View A&M University. Dr. Price, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Up next, what budget cuts and shortfalls for NASA and the ISS may mean for us here in Space City. Stay with us as Houston Matters continues. This is Houston Matters. I'm Craig Cohen. A new poll out this week from Marquette Law School finds 63% of respondents favor reducing spending on NASA and the space program. It's reasonable to assume the poll results would be a bit different here in Space City, where proposed budget cuts to the space agency could have implications for some Houstonians' jobs. Take the International Space Station. Ground operations for the American side of the station and training for NASA's astronauts all happen here. NASA already faced a budget shortfall for the ISS coming into this budget cycle, and the Trump administration wants to cut more. Andrea Leinfelder covers space for the Houston Chronicle and recently poured over an internal NASA email about the agency's budget situation. She tells our Michael Haggerty NASA's taken some steps already, but still has a shortfall to address.
It's still $1 billion short. And so NASA's going to take a couple of different approaches to continue trying to address the shortfall. One really notable one is dropping the number of people on the International Space Station. Right now, there are 7 astronauts. Russia sends up 3 cosmonauts, and NASA sends up 4 crew members, a mixture of astronauts from, the US, Japan, Canada, and Europe. So those 4 people are going to be dropped down to 3. And when you drop the number of people on the space station, that means less science. And so it could be cut by half.
Wow. What created the shortfall, and does it have anything to do with sort of the general budget slashing that we're hearing about the Trump administration doing all across the federal government?
The shortfall has come over a couple of years of just, the space station not getting as much money in the budget as needed. But this is very separate from what President Donald Trump has proposed. So Trump came in and what they're calling a skinny budget, but his budget request has proposed reducing the space station funding by $500 million, which is roughly a third of the estimated operating budget. And so that would cause other financial pressures onto the space station.
So cutting something like a third of the budget when it was already facing a $1 billion shortfall on top of that.
Yeah, exactly.
So you mentioned the ISS program would compensate or is compensating by reducing the number of astronauts on board, but at least from NASA astronauts' perspective. But what else have they done as far as cargo missions and flight schedules, anything else they've done to address the budget shortfall?
They're still just looking at different things they could do. And so one of the things is asking the astronauts to stay on board longer. And so the email I saw suggested that the crews could be staying on the station for longer. Right now, they go up and they stay for about 6 months. And so they might extend that a little bit because then they don't have to launch rockets as often. And the fewer rocket launches, the more money you save.
Yeah, we just had those astronauts come back after spending several more months than they planned on, but this would make this more of a regular thing to extend that out and have to fly less missions to them.
Yeah, this would be separate from the whole Butch and Sunny stranded astronaut storyline because these people would go up knowing they'd be there a little longer.
Yeah, it's a reminder that they're staying up there much for several months at a time, where the only thing there was those two were not prepared or planning to stay long, but they did. So NASA runs, obviously, it's the space station program from the ground here in Houston, the Johnson Space Center. I mean, how might this budget shortfall and cutting a third from the budget, affect things and people on the ground here in Houston?
Yeah, so the biggest fear is jobs. The space station has a lot of jobs tied to it here in Houston. So when you start cutting money and other parts of President Donald Trump's budget looks at reducing the workforce and reducing other programs based here in Houston. And so if you cut these programs, the biggest fear is losing jobs here in Houston.
So when does that reduction in crew begin?
The reduction in crew could begin on the SpaceX Crew 12 mission that's expected to launch in the first quarter of next year.
This is Houston Matters. I'm Michael Haggerty. I'm talking with Andrea Leinfelder of the Houston Chronicle about a budget shortfall facing the International Space Station. Might other countries send their astronauts to fill some of the spots left open by NASA?
No, because NASA, when it sends 4 people to the space station, it's already an international crew. Those 4 people are mixtures of Americans, Canadians, Europeans, and Japanese astronauts. There are only 2 ways to get to the space station. It's on a SpaceX rocket through NASA, or you can get there on a Roscosmos rocket that's launched by the Russian space agency. And so those are the only 2 ways to go up there. And Russia likes to send up cosmonauts, and then NASA will send up a mixture of Americans, Europeans, Japanese, and Canadian astronauts.
Okay, the International Space Station.
Yes.
The space station isn't the only thing that NASA does. How are some of these budget constraints and the shortfall going to affect other projects?
When you look at the budget that President Donald Trump has proposed, it's proposed canceling a few programs that are led here in Houston. So one is the Gateway. This is a small station that would orbit the moon. It's been part of this whole plan to return humans to the moon. And so that program is based here in Houston. And if it gets cut in the budget, then, those jobs get lost or moved elsewhere. And the other thing is the Orion spacecraft is a key part of how NASA plans to get astronauts back to the moon. And the budget also wants to end that program and switch over to a commercial provider. And so that would also be another program that's based here in Houston.
I feel like that could be a big blow. We've seen so much promoted about the Orion spacecraft, so much of it and stuff around Houston, but also just been talked about it so much as the plan for this next set of lunar missions.
Yeah, but there is the possibility to get a little bit more work too. President Donald Trump and Elon Musk, who has become a close ally and advisor to the White House, both of them really want to go to Mars. And so they're putting a focus on getting to Mars. So I know we are the hub for human spaceflight here in Houston. So there is a chance that we get some of this new programs if they're created to get humans to Mars. All of this is a big if right now, but those are something that I'm sure the Johnson Space Center will be hoping to get if we lose some of these moon programs.
Just a reminder, I guess, too, that every time a new administration takes office, there are different priorities and the budget swings and the priorities, and that seems to often affect when these missions happen and all those long timetables when NASA says, hey, we're going to go back in 2028, and then the next time you hear it's 2035, and that's just a reminder of how volatile that funding cycle is and how that affects so many people on the ground here in Houston.
Yes, NASA definitely is influenced by new presidents when they come in and they want to make the mark. This one is interesting because it was President Trump during his first term who directed the agency to the moon. And so now, he still wants to send the agency to the moon, but he seems to be talking about Mars a lot more. So there's just, it's really interesting seeing how it'll shake out under his second term. But yes, definitely, every time a new president comes in, NASA is an area where they kind of like to plant their flag or make their mark. And it can definitely affect missions. It can end missions, it can start missions, it can cause missions to fall behind, especially as we can't agree on budget.
Do you get a sense at all from NASA or employees or anybody on that side here that on the government side that feels like maybe Elon Musk, since one of his major businesses is commercial spaceflight, has undue influence in sort of pointing the focus that way as opposed to using Orion spacecraft?
No one within the agency would go that far, but a lot of people outside the agency are concerned about potential conflicts of interest because Elon Musk is the founder of SpaceX, and SpaceX has a lot of government contracts with NASA, with the DoD. And so there's concern that there could be conflicts of interest, but no one within the agency is raising those concerns at the moment.
And this is a little further out, but just as things go on the ISS, I mean, it's a reminder that as things are changing, that eventually NASA is planning to phase out or retire the ISS, right?
Yes, the International Space Station, as of now, will be retired at the end of 2030. It's going to be a controlled reentry into the Pacific Ocean. And then commercial space stations are being developed now, and they're going to be sent to space. And so the idea is to transition off of this government-run, government-led platform to commercially built, owned, and operated space stations. That's the next vision for NASA. The idea is to pass the baton to the commercial sector in low Earth orbit, so NASA has more money and more focus on pushing farther to where you can't really expect most commercial companies can go to Mars. There's not really a business case for it right now, unless, of course, you're Elon Musk and you have that personal desire. But NASA is built to take these challenging things and accomplish it and then pass it to the commercial sector. That's the whole idea.
Andrea Leinfelder covers space for the Houston Chronicle. She spoke with Houston Matters' Michael Haggerty. Just ahead, from that George Floyd Third Ward murals demolition to Whataburger suit over onions to Sesame Street's future gaining clarity, this week's non-expert panel weighs in on intrigues in the news on the good, the bad, and the ugly as Houston Matters continues. A lot can happen in a week. Some of it good, some of it bad, some of it downright ugly. When faced with intriguing developments in the week's news, we turn to a rotating panel of non-experts to parse the good, the bad, and the ugly of it all. On today's panel, Raul Ramos, Associate Professor of History at the University of Houston, and Natalie Arsenault, President of Arsenault International Consulting. Raul, Natalie, welcome to Houston Matters.
Howdy.
Hi, Craig.
Panel, former Houstonian George Floyd was murdered 5 years ago Sunday by a white police officer in Minneapolis during an arrest. His death sparked nationwide outrage and protests. The next month, here in Houston, artists came together to create a mural dedicated to Floyd, a Third Ward childhood resident, along with references to fellow Houstonian Sandra Bland, who died in a Waller County jail 3 days after her arrest at a traffic stop, Breonna Taylor, a Louisville medical worker shot and killed during a botched police raid, and the Black Lives Matter movement that sprang up from these and other tragedies. This week, that mural in what became known as the Ennis Art Block at the corner of Elgin and Ennis in Third Ward was demolished. Resident Naomi Carrier tells KHOU she was ready to cry about the demolition, calling it a project of erasure. No word on what will go up next in the space left behind, though Carrier mused in a few years' time it could be a condo. The George Floyd Black Lives Matter mural in the Third Ward and the building it was on are demolished this week, which happens to be the 5th anniversary of Floyd's murder. Is this good, bad, or ugly? Natalie Arsenault.
I think it's probably a blend of all of them, because I probably have some unpopular opinions here. Obviously, I think it's good that there was even a mural up for the sake of remembering. I kind of want to know was the building, like, could someone buy the building? Like, because if you just put a mural up on the side of the building and the building doesn't belong to you, then at any point in time, the owners or the city or state, whoever owns the deed to that, can do whatever they want to do with it, which is ultimately what has happened here. I also have kind of I have quite a strong reaction when we start talking about immortalizing people in statues on public property, on sides of buildings and things like that, regardless of like the circumstances around that individual. My preference is for people to put those articles that are to memorialize instances and events in history that have happened that we should really pay attention to in museums. And so I would really prefer for it to be in a museum, where you might have a little bit more control over what happens to the installation and that and so forth. I guess it was bad timing to do it the week of the 5th anniversary. Like, I feel like they could have been a little more sensitive to the timing around when they decided to demolish the building. They could have had an actual ceremony around it, being that since it was the week of the 5th anniversary of it happening, they could have done something along those lines to memorialize it, and share what they were looking to do in the future, the people who owned it or whatever. So I think it was bad timing to do it the week of it was very insensitive, I feel like. But I do think this is an opportunity now for those who want to memorialize that event, or those events actually, because it was bigger than just George Floyd, to look for a space where it can have a more permanent residency and exist without any challenges.
All right. Good, bad, or ugly. Raul Ramos.
Well, I agree. It's bad, and I would add tragic to see this happen after a tragedy. And there's a way that the creation of the mural was organic. Like you said, Nellie, it was not an official space of any sort. Clearly, the owners of the building might not even live in Houston, as far as we know. I don't know any of that specific background. I do know Houston has some pretty weak historic preservation protections in comparison to other cities around the country. This was commemorating not just a local person and an event that had an impact locally and nationally, I would say even globally. I mean, the moment that this happened, we're still undergoing that transformation. We're still coming to terms with what this means. It's reverberating in intended ways and unintended ways. That history is still 10, 15, 20 years from being written. So I think that it's about an organic expression of grief and an expression of community in particular. And this is the part that is also tragic in the sense that we're looking for ways of representing our community, our neighbors, at a time when that feels unstable, it feels like it's changing. And the mural had provided that kind of anchor. I agree with you that not only was the timing bad, there are ways of preserving this, right? If this was maybe announced, you could have had a group come together, maybe even Project Row House, CDC could have put together at least an effort to preserve that wall. You don't have to preserve a whole building. You can preserve a wall. It happens all the time. We see it in all sorts of historical redevelopment that takes place in Houston. And I think Houston has some great models for that. We didn't have that opportunity. And again, those protections don't exist in Houston. Maybe there's a small fine they might have to pay if there was some kind of recognition, but I don't even think that that's there. I do think this is an opportunity, though, to think about making these kinds of permanent projections onto our community. I think murals are incredibly important. You know, in Mexican history, murals, particularly after the Mexican Revolution, play a very important role in creating a national identity. You have the murals by Orozco, Siqueiros, Diego Rivera. Those murals not only created a sense of community and a sense of belonging, but connected with the larger history of pre-colonial Mexico and through the various challenges, and depicted a phoenix surging out of those ashes. And I think that was the hope of this mural, that you see it, and it was full of hope out of tragedy, that we could change our society and our communities for the better.
Panel, a Harris County man is suing Whataburger for allegedly leaving onions on his hamburger. Demary Ardell Wilson seeking between $250,000 and $1 million in damages. He filed suit late last month after allegedly sustaining serious personal injuries following an allergic reaction last July to the onions in question, which he says he requested to be left off of his burger. Last Friday, Whataburger filed its response, arguing Wilson failed to use caution as would have been used by a reasonable person under the circumstances. This, by the way, is not Wilson's first such lawsuit. In May of last year, he filed one against Sonic for allegedly leaving onions on a burger there in April of 2023. As Houston Public Media's Kyle McClanagan reported Monday, Sonic denied that allegation, and that case is ongoing. A Houston man sues Whataburger because a store allegedly left onions on his hamburger. Is this good, bad, or ugly? Raul?
Well, there are so many ugly aspects to this story, and I will just say that we live in a time where we're very conscious and aware of what we're eating, what we're buying, what we're putting into our bodies. You know, I have several relatives who are gluten intolerant or have gluten allergies, and so that's particularly challenging. I've found out things that I didn't know. I didn't realize that soy sauce has wheat in it, and that's something that you don't learn until you're with somebody that has an allergy. So you're not only asking, please hold the bun on my burger, but please don't put any soy sauce on my teriyaki. And so that's part of the change that the awareness and the change that you need to bring to any kind of situation. So I kind of agree with Whataburger. I mean, it's not that hard to just open the bun and look. You're not talking about an ingredient that's mashed into the patty or anything like that. This is something that's very. I don't like mustard. I wipe the mustard off if it's on there. If they accidentally don't put it. And I understand this is not about a preference. My friend Brad can't stand onions, can't stand eggs. Like, I get it, but this is an allergy, and so I understand. But at the same time, this is something that can be changed. These allergies have changed the world around us. It used to be that you got peanuts on an airplane, right? They don't serve peanuts anymore. I think maybe Delta might still, but they took peanuts off the airplanes for peanut allergies, for people who have very extreme reactions to peanuts around them. So I think we have an increased sensitivity to that. I think the world has developed an increased sensitivity to that. You sit down at a restaurant now, and the first thing they ask you is, are there any allergies we should be aware of? I appreciate that. And I think that starts a conversation that educates everyone around us.
Well, you've certainly given a lot more thought to this than I have. And I'm afraid to say we're out of time. Sorry, Natalie. I know. Good, bad, or ugly, Natalie Arsenault.
I don't know. So as a person who has allergies and actually has an EpiPen, I am inclined to agree with Whataburger. I'm like, the only person who can save you is you. I'm convinced of that. So I don't depend on anybody else to hopefully get it right and all this other. Like, I'm like, look, I could die from this. I need to do all the checks to make sure. So it's not that with an onion type of allergy. I mean, like, he could have just opened the bun, which I certainly would have done. I would have told them, yes, about the allergy, but then I also would have double checked, because you're dealing probably with teenagers and people who aren't paying attention and all sorts of things in the fast food industry. It seems like he has a bit of a pattern here. And I also know, like, for example, we're getting ready to go to Louisiana, and you go to New Orleans, and one of my allergies is actually seafood and shellfish. So I don't eat anything, because literally one time I was there, I was getting green beans. I told the waiter my allergies. I was like, hey, look, seafood, shellfish, pork, I will die. Please don't kill me. And I get these green beans, and I take a bite. And I was like, this green bean tastes kind of fishy. I was like, what is the thing? And he was like, oh, yeah, we put anchovy sauce in our... I was like, oh, my God. And at that time, my lips started to swell up, the side of my face. And I didn't have an EpiPen, so my mom is crushing up Benadryl. I'm practically snorting Benadryl like a heroin addict of some sort. So it's really important. So it's important to emphasize it, yes, but it's also important to double check and just make sure 2 or 3 times into the process, because, again, I firmly believe no one can save you but yourself. So that's important. So I'm with Whataburger on this, like, and don't eat at places where they, like, if I had an onion allergy, I probably would not be going through a drive-through. I guarantee you. Now, maybe I would go to a burger place where they make, like, I can watch them make the burger and all of that, but I really wouldn't. So you also have to be very cautious, and you're the only person who can own that responsibility, is you being very cautious. So hopefully the legal system prevails, and Whataburger isn't forced to pay and Sonic isn't forced to pay for something that, you also have your own responsibility for. So that's my hope.
But did you sue the restaurant for $250,000? That's the question.
I should have. No. I mean, I was a missed opportunity. Dang it.
You were on your Benadryl high at that moment. You couldn't really think straight.
I was.
Panel Sesame Street's future received some clarity this week with the announcement that Sesame Workshop had reached a streaming rights deal with Netflix that not only keeps the show available over the air for free on public television, but allows public TV stations to air new episodes at the same time they become available for streaming on Netflix and PBS Kids. This is a much more favorable deal for public television than the prior agreement the makers of Sesame Street previously had with HBO Max, which for the last decade had exclusive rights to new episodes for months before they were made available to PBS stations. Sesame Street debuted and aired exclusively on PBS for its first 45 years. As NPR's Elizabeth Blair reported Monday, its next season, its 56th on television, will feature the return of the fan-favorite segments Elmo's World and Cookie Monster's Foodie Truck. Sunny days again for Sesame Street, which will continue to be available for free over the air on public television while also streaming on Netflix and PBS Kids. Is this good, bad, or ugly, Natalie?
It's great. I love it. I think, Sesame Street and a lot of the shows that are on PBS bring a lot of education. They open thoughts. They share different perspectives. I remember like the Mr. Rogers episode where, during kind of that civil rights period, he put his feet in the pool with, the mailman who was black and all that. Like, there's so much learning to be had from a lot of these shows, and it's put into a genre that is palatable and easy to comprehend for young minds to begin to process and think about it and consider, the options and impacts and all that. So anytime these types of shows can continue on and also be free is great, because one of the things I think we assume is that everybody has access to everything, and it's not true. So not everybody is paying for cable or paying for all the streaming services or paying for all, just whatever. So anytime you can get it, and it's no charge and it's an educational opportunity, I think it's fantastic. So I'm super excited about this.
All right, Raul.
It's so good. It's like a warm hug that they're continuing the show, that it's not falling victim to the cuts we're seeing all around us all the time. I mean, this is one of the hopes we have for our world, really, that the lessons, I agree, Nellie, the education you're getting is content, of course, every letter of the alphabet you learn through Sesame Street, but it's also emotional learning. You get that modeling, community modeling ways of dealing with difficult things. I don't know if you knew, in 2017, Sesame Workshop received a $100 million grant to develop programming for kids in Syria who had war trauma. I mean, that's how powerful these Muppets are, and the ability to think about a future and a world that is welcoming, that is supportive. I kind of sometimes feel like you're a Muppet, Craig. I listen to you, and I feel like you bring a little bit of Sesame Street to us here in Houston every day. You're our own, and you. I don't know, people don't see, but I feel like you're some character.
What gives you that impression, Raul? Why would you say that?
Today's Good, Bad, and Ugly is sponsored by the letter U for ugly. It's
Raul Ramos is an associate professor of history at the University of Houston. Natalie Arsenault is president of Arsenault International Consulting. Raul, Natalie, thanks very much.
Thanks, Craig.
Sunny day, sweeping out Plaza
Houston's Kinetic ensemble is celebrating its 10th anniversary this year and is marking the milestone with a season finale concert tonight called Deep Rooted. 4 members of the conductorless string orchestra talk now about their start at Rice University and share some highlights from the last decade of performances.
I'm Natalie Lynn Douglas, and I'm the founder and artistic director of Kinetic, and I've been with the group since the beginning, and I play the violin.
My name is Austin Llewellyn. I am a double bassist and the managing director of Kinetic Ensemble, and I first joined the group in the fall of 2021.
I'm Giancarlo Latta. I'm a violinist and composer, and I'm also a founding member of Kinetic.
I'm Tanya Burton, and I'm a violist with Kinetic, and my first concert was spring of 2016.
Well, Kinetic started as a student project. I was a doctoral student at the Shepherd School of Music at Rice University in 2014, and I really started thinking about this idea of starting a conductorless string orchestra that would serve the Houston community. I just saw this real energy and thirst to be making music together in a really meaningful way. And just saw this opportunity to get these really wonderful, talented musicians together to start something.
So I remember in my student days at Rice, always really admiring the work that these folks were doing. I think the first concert I came to would have been the Britain Serenade. And I don't remember when that was, but it was just awe-inspiring, absolutely fantastic. I knew I wanted to play with these folks. And I finally got my chance in fall of 2021. It was a bit of an unusual Kinetic concert in that it was a big collaboration with the Houston Chamber Choir. So we had a conductor. And this was for a cantata by Daniel Naggs with some phenomenal singers, including the mezzo-soprano Sasha Cook, who was just in town for Tannhäuser with the opera. It was just such a wonderful experience with great friends working on a very high level, and I have just been in love with this group ever since.
I think the thing that I remember most about the first few years, and certainly the very beginning of Kinetic, was just this energy that I still think we have today, but the sort of newness of it was really exciting, both when we were rehearsing and performing together, but also just coming up with ideas for what this group could be and, what the possibilities might be. And I think it's especially cool now to reflect on it and see that I think a lot of those things that we dreamed of doing, we have done, and actually a lot more, I think.
When I think back to the earliest memories of Kinetic, I am imagining our rehearsals at West University Church. And we would have these really, really long days. It would start at 9 a.m., maybe end at 4 or 5 p.m. And while that sounds super intense, it was so fun, and we were there because we wanted to be there. Even during the breaks, sometimes people would get cookies from Tiny's Milk and Cookies, and we would just be talking about the music still. There was just such an energy and a desire to just dig into the music and get our ideas heard and go that extra mile to make everything just exactly the way we wanted. And that was just a really new experience for me in that size of an ensemble.
It's really hard to choose one favorite experience because I think each project has been so unique. But one memorable concert was when Giancarlo actually wrote a piece for the ensemble, and we were performing on that program Beethoven's Grosse Fuge. And he asked if he could write a companion piece to be performed right before the Beethoven. I really loved that program because there was something really cohesive about the overall performance experience from beginning to end. The program was called Musical Madness, and I think that was just a really successful and interesting program.
A performance that really stands out to me in our history that was really meaningful to me was 1 year ago this month. It was called At Play. It was at Match. We were in collaboration with Frame Dance, wonderful mixed community professional dance company. This program was headed up in part by Tanya here. And for those of you who I'm sure remember, this was the week of the derecho. And we were loading into the dance studio for dress rehearsal. And as we were doing so, transformers blew, the power went out. We were huddling in the back in case there was a tornado. We didn't know if we could go through with the concert. We checked in with all of the dancers, we checked in with all of our musicians. Match thankfully had power, and everyone so intensely wanted to go through with the concert that we decided it was meaningful, it was what our people wanted, we were going to do it. We set up, we knew a lot of our audience still didn't have power, so we scrounged up all the phone chargers we had, set up a phone charging coat check. One of our board members sat there through the whole concert with them. And despite all of the challenges, I think it was one of our best performances to date too. And it has just really stayed in my mind as a really meaningful experience.
Just to add on to, it was kind of surreal because, we decided, okay, it's worthwhile for the musicians and the dancers, we wanted to make it happen for ourselves. But I thought to myself, okay, probably no one's going to show up. But then it was packed. And I think that was just such a sign of we're here in the community. And it made it so much more meaningful to have gone through that experience together.
Over the years, there have been some really memorable concerts, and I think maybe I'll just give sort of a highlights reel of some of my favorites. Very early on, actually our very first sort of official concert of, season 1, concert 1, we played the Vaughan Williams Tallis Fantasia in a church where we half of the ensemble, the group is sort of divided into 2 orchestras, and half of the group was on the floor in the, where an orchestra would traditionally be. And then the other half was in the choir loft, and it was, again, sort of this crazy idea, this just energy that we wanted to try this thing. We didn't know if it was going to work, and I remember when we were rehearsing, we sort of had to shout back and forth across the church, but we really and I think we almost scrapped the idea, and then we pushed through, and it ended up being this really magical sound and experience, and I think when the audience sort of heard the orchestra behind them for the first time, I remember I was up there with that group and just seeing heads sort of turn around and where is this sound coming from? I think also in the first few seasons, we played almost all of the string orchestra works by Britten, which was a really fascinating sort of deep dive into his music. I think it sort of helped us find our sound and shape our music making in a way that I think is still really present in the group. And I think a lot of the way that Britten writes so masterfully for string instruments, I mean, it's sort of a chicken or the egg thing, but I feel that Britten writes very virtuosic string parts, actually, even if it's, whether it's a string quartet or a piece for string orchestra. Often orchestra music, the parts are not, maybe not quite as technically difficult as a concerto or a sonata, but Britten really takes advantage of the capabilities of the stringed instruments, and so I think it's the perfect kind of music for a group like us, where it is this blend of chamber music and orchestra, and also soloistic qualities as well, and sort of everybody having a voice and having their own sort of virtuosity to bring to the group. And I think that sort of shaped our concept of sound and music making.
One performance that stands out was actually quite recent, was when we were in Boston at MIT, and we were performing some works with Miguel Zenon, who's this amazing saxophonist. And I think this one stood out for a few different reasons. One, because we already know ourselves as a group, and I think this really stretched kind of our artistry and kind of the realm of the music that we do, because the saxophonist is improvising a ton, and his style is really jazzy, and it's a whole different sound world. And I think it just kind of opened my eyes to see more potential, and it was cool to see individual voices really kind of stick out in that concert. One piece in particular, it started with this improvised cello solo, and it was one of my favorite moments in all of Kinetic history, just because I felt like Bree, one of our cellists, was just so in the moment, and it just really spoke to the room, and just seeing how the other cellists kind of joined in and kind of transformed that whole piece. So it was just, it's been really cool to see how we can kind of expand what we do and still maintain our string orchestra, but then give these moments where you see our individual artists just take us to another place.
So this Friday is Kinetic's season finale, and we'll also be celebrating the ensemble's 10th anniversary. And for this program, I really wanted us to both reflect on our first 10 years and also celebrate the things that we've achieved, the things that are really important to us as an ensemble. And so one of the things that we've always been committed to is commissioning and premiering new works and really expanding the repertoire for string orchestra. And to that end, for this program, we will be premiering 3 pieces by composers Mason Bynes, who is a Houston native but lives in New York now, Evan Ziporin, who is a really distinguished composer and professor of composition at MIT, and also our very own Giancarlo Lara. And so having those 3 premieres felt really meaningful to sort of acknowledge all the accomplishments that the ensemble has done in championing new music. And to date, we've had the opportunity to premiere more than 30 new works, and that's something that we're really proud of. And to kind of tie everything back to our roots, we wanted to bring a piece by Benjamin Britten back onto this program, a piece that is really meaningful for us, and that is Britten's Variations on a Theme of Frank Bridge, which in itself is a tribute to something that was part of Britten's past. He takes a little tune from a piece by his first composition teacher and turns it into a really substantial composition. And so we're really excited to perform this again. The first time Kinetic performed it was in 2015, one of our first concerts as an ensemble.
We heard Kinetic musicians Natalie Lynn Douglas, Austin Llewellyn, and Giancarlo Lara, and Tanya Burton in that piece produced by Houston Matters' Joshua Zinn. Kinetic's deep-rooted concert is at the Midtown Arts and Theater Center, Houston. The Match, tonight at 7:30. And that'll do it for today's show. The Houston Matters team includes Michael Haggerty, Joshua Zinn, Brenda Valdivia, Mincho Jacob, and Laura Walker. Jared Carroll's our technical director. Houston Matters will give way Monday for a Memorial Day special. We will be back on Tuesday when we will revisit a question we asked you last year. Does Houston need a new big honkin' thing to help seal our identity? You know, a major landmark like so many other cities have, and Houston had for so long with the Astrodome. Let us know what you think. Text 713-440-8870 or email talk@houstonmatters.org. I'm Craig Cohen. Join us Tuesday for that and other Houston Matters.